This interview is being made of Mr. Arthur Jones, who came to Ardmore in 1889. Mr. Jones, could you tell us about some of your early experiences that were the first major businesses in Ardmore?
Well, when I came to Ardmore, there were 5 little stores there. They were small ones. There was one furniture store, one drug store, 2 grocery stores, I believe, and a little wagon yard. And maybe a blacksmith shop, or it came on a little bit later. And about the rest of it was about 10 or 15 hay barns. The railroad had just come through here, and there was ways of shipping it. And this itself was really a sort of a ranch country. There were a few cows, cattle, and things like that. And there were a few farms being built and established right away. And the town grew very rapidly, and many stores, little stores, came in during the time, and we soon had quite a little city, but a little town. But nobody could own any of the property until the government passed it again and made a town site of it, and those men in town could own that land. Then, as they owned the stores and so forth, they decided they'd better have a sort of a street. They just, these 5 little stores just took a big old turnplow, and they went up one side and down the other, and they called that Main Street. Then there was a road that went way out in the country, out toward Caddo Creek, where there were a few farms, and about the ones that were closest. And when they didn't want to change the road or anything of the kind, they just made a street out of it and called it Caddo Street. Then they wanted to get the streets to go up by the men that lived there, that owned the different stores, and a few other people that worked there, and cow people that lived in there. And they'd just lay off the street up by that house, and maybe it'd go in one direction, and directly it can go another. Trade came, when they began to raise cotton out through this country, the trade came from 50 and 100 miles, which meant that people would be 2 or 3 days getting to market and back. But Ardmore was always a good cotton center.
Tell me, Mr. Jones, something about the early schools.
Well, the early schools that we had in this country were these. They'd erect a little schoolhouse of some kind. Of course, it would usually be, then they'd have the churches, church meetings in this same little schoolhouse. Just be a one little box, one-room schoolhouse, or maybe 2. The first one I remember in Ardmore with 2 rooms, and that was the first school I went to when I was 11 years old. And I still remember the 2 teachers that taught there, Mr. Flannery and Mr. Dick, who finally became the first mayor of Ardmore years later. Then there was another little school. This one stood in the block just across the street from the Ardmore office. In the block, it's taken in by the Mulkey Hotel, and coming off down there to Broadway, but it stood just about midway the block, known as the King Schoolhouse. In this King Schoolhouse is where the first Methodist church that Ardmore ever had was organized. Now, another little school that I went to was known as the South Side School, or Mrs. Robertson's School, and it stood right on where Harvey Brothers are now. Mrs. Robertson and her family lived upstairs, and they taught the school downstairs. The Presbyterian Church stood just across the little street, right about where the courthouse is now. I remember when Christmas time came and the teacher wanted to have an entertainment, a Christmas entertainment, why, we had it over at the little Presbyterian Church. And there it was. I saw my first Santa Claus and my first Christmas tree. I also said a little speech that my mother had taught me. And I got a cake made by the first bakery that was in Ardmore, when they learned to take the icing and make letters on it, which was a rare thing for me. I took a little cake home, put it in the bureau drawer, and looked at it about 20 times the next day. Left it in there that night. The next morning when I went to look for my cake, the rats had eaten it up. Now, in these schools, they were subscription schools. You paid so much a month to go, and you got there the best way you could. And then the little rural schools were the same way. They were there were more schools, more months in town, but out in the country, we only had it about 2 months in the summertime when crops were laid by, and then 2 months in the wintertime after cotton had been picked before picking of crops again. So those children didn't have much chance at school. They had a chance to forget between times what they had learned in the time before. Now, you just went just as far as you could in a book. If a boy could go pretty good in arithmetic, he just went. If he was good in spelling, but we didn't have much help besides reading and spelling and arithmetic. Did finally get into a little bit of history and a little bit of grammar and so forth. And but those schools did some good teaching because they used McGuffey's readers and Webster's blueback speller, and I don't think there's anything better. I noticed that the government, a lot of people are working now to put those McGuffey's readers back into practice. Wanted to change perhaps the pictures in them, but the morals of those stories were good. And with that kind of schooling, and usually a different teacher put in your every session, that was the best chance, our chance. And I think we did pretty well. Later it was that Ardmore got a little college here. The Methodist people built one called Hargrove College. And I, at that time, had moved out in the country, and I rode 6 miles to school there until I moved closer where I could walk for 4 years. And I went to this college, which proved to be a mighty good school. Nothing much more, though, than just an ordinary grade school. Although it was called college, and gave a little degree, which stood, because my sister got that degree, and when she got her A.B. degree at Edmond, this little degree that she'd gotten down there at Hargrove College was accepted. And then when she got her master's degree at Norman, this little degree was accepted. So Hargrove was a pretty good school. As I say, I went there 4 years, and then from there I got me a job in a dry goods store, made a bookkeeper out of myself, and so forth.
Now, could you tell me something about your mail service work?
When I was about 1910, I took the civil service examination and went in as a letter carrier at the post office here in Ardmore. I'm now retired. But I hadn't been in there very long until I went to keeping books at night at one of the stores where I had been working as a clerk. I worked in this store 19 years. It changed hands 5 times, but I went as fixtures. Then in the mail service, I worked on until retirement. However, I've worked a little bit since then and employed for about 5 years.
Could you tell me something about your early church experiences?
Well, my first little thing in church was I remember going to Sunday school. I remember one of the preachers that I liked so well, and I don't know whether people would like that kind of a man or not. I've heard that man preach an hour and 5 minutes, right straight. And he always looked like he was looking right at me and pointing his finger at me. But that's every drummer and everything that ever came to Ardmore about that time always went around to hear this man, even if he did preach long sermons. And in this Hargrove College that was built there, we lived close to it, and they had a bus and one horse that they used to their little delivery wagon, and on Sunday they'd hire a horse from us and hitch up to this bus to take those boarders down to Sunday school and back, and so I got to go with them. And therefore I went pretty regular to Sunday school because I was getting 2 bits a day for that horse I was hiring up to them. Now, later on, I got to work in Sunday school, more so after I got almost grown, and have been rather active. I know that I've served with the young folks in the senior department, and I have been president of the men's Bible class, and the outside issues of that organized a little country Sunday school out here at east of town, which is a nice little church at this time. I think I got it sort of started. The other thing that I was interested in is when the Highway 77 was built across the Arbuckle Mountains up here. It was done by convict labor trustees from the penitentiary, and I conducted a Sunday school up there in the afternoon for as long as they were here. And when I got back to town, got to work back in town, one time they caught me and asked me to teach a Sunday school class. Said the teacher was absent. Well, I never taught one, and I told the man that I couldn't teach them. And I says, I don't know anything about it. But I says, you can keep them together. The next Sunday morning, this superintendent, which was Russell Brown, one of our big lawyers up in Washington, D.C. now, and the man known with $1,000 smile, $1 million smile, I believe it is, met me at the door and says, that teacher's absent again, and you go up there, Mr. Jones, and take those boys over. That was 27 years ago, last October, and I haven't missed a Sunday or been tardy since then.
Mr. Jones, back in your days, what form of entertainment did the young people have?
Oh, way back in the early days, we had what we called play parties. They would sing the songs, and I think it's just about the same as dancing and having the violin and things like that. But it was called a play party, and we'd sing Old Joe Clark and lead her up and down a little brass wagon and a whole lot of those things. We just have as big a time as you please. However, we didn't object to square dances much, except if you gave a dance, or every old cowboy for 10 or 15 miles might come in, and those cowboys would sort of be a little bit rough sometimes and take it over. So we had our own bunch, and sometimes when there was nobody but just our crowd there, we had a boy that played the violin, and we'd dance. We've had lots of entertainment with that, and those old songs they had good music to them, but of course I don't know who did. Every fellow tried to sing, and my singing wasn't very good, but we had lots of fun at those play parties.
This interview has been made by LaWash Senior in Ardmore High School, 1956.